You wake before the light has properly arrived, while the air is still cold enough to bite the inside of your nose, and before anyone speaks, you are already doing the small inventory that survival seems to demand. You touch the edge of the tool bundle. You check the fire bed for a living ember under the ash. You glance at the entrance, then back again, because back again feels safer than once. Someone coughs. Someone shifts. A child reaches toward last night's scraps and gets pulled away. Nothing dramatic happens. That's the point. In most of human history, disaster rarely announced itself with a trumpet. It came in tiny, stupid forms: spoiled meat, a missed footprint, a forgotten spark, a wound touched with dirty hands, a loose knot, a half-heard sound outside the shelter. And if your mind was built to keep returning to those little dangers, that might not have been a flaw. It might have been the margin. So here's the central question: did OCD traits keep ancient humans alive? Let's go through it properly. The easy assumption is that obsessive-compulsive traits are obviously maladaptive, obviously broken, obviously just the mind getting stuck in useless loops. Except that's not actually how it worked. A lot of researchers now think the better starting point is not to ask why a disordered mind would exist at all, but why ordinary human minds come with systems for checking, cleaning, rehearsing, storing, ordering, repeating, and worrying in the first place. Clinical OCD, the disorder, is not just being careful a lot. It involves intrusive thoughts and compulsive behaviors that become distressing, time-consuming, and impairing. But many of the ingredients inside it, harm avoidance, contamination sensitivity, ritualized action, relentless doubt, look less like alien malfunctions and more like human safety systems pushed too far. Take checking first, because checking is one of those behaviors that looks ridiculous from the outside and deeply reasonable from the inside. A person turns back to the door, then back again, then one more time. In modern OCD research, one influential idea is that humans have something like a security motivation system, meaning a built-in threat management circuit that gets activated by uncertain danger and pushes you toward precautionary action. Not certainty, uncertain danger. That distinction matters. A tiger in front of you triggers panic. A maybe snake in the grass, a maybe coal still burning, a maybe loose shelter wall, a maybe missing child, those are different. They don't demand one heroic response. They demand vigilance, scanning, rechecking, staying mentally attached to a possibility that has not been resolved. And in an ancient environment, unresolved possibilities were lethal. The fire is probably out. Probably is not good enough if one hidden ember can burn your sleeping area. The food is probably fine. Probably is not good enough if one spoiled piece can make half the camp sick. The ravine is probably clear. Probably is not good enough if a predator passed through an hour ago and you missed one sign in the mud. In that world, the person who checks twice is annoying. The person who never checks is dead. But here's the complication. The system that protects you by refusing easy certainty is also the system most likely to overshoot. The same mind that keeps your group from sleeping beside a live coal can also keep you standing over cold ash long after the danger is gone, still waiting for the internal feeling of enough. Useful right up until it is. Now let's talk about contamination, because this is where the story gets almost embarrassingly physical. Rot has a smell. Waste has a smell. A wound has a look. There's a whole body of research on disgust as part of what some psychologists call the behavioral immune system. Basically, the set of emotions and habits that help you avoid pathogens before they enter your body. You cannot see most microbes, obviously. Ancient humans could not know what bacteria were. But you do not need germ theory to recoil from feces, vomit, rotten flesh, infected skin, stagnant water, or food that has started to sweeten in the wrong way. You need only a nervous system that learns fast and overreacts on purpose. That overreaction is the clever bit. Better to refuse one edible thing than eat one fatal thing. Better to wash more than less. If dirt can carry danger, you can't inspect directly. Better to keep the butchered carcass, the sleeping place, and the waste area separated if mixing them increases disease risk. You can imagine it at the level of sensation. Sticky hands, the metallic smell of blood, flies landing too quickly, meat turned just slightly wrong, the social tension when someone breaches a hygiene boundary and everyone else notices before anyone says a word. Those are not abstract problems. They are ancient ones. But again, the complication comes immediately after the reveal. A system built to avoid contamination is not calibrated for truth in the scientific sense. It is calibrated for caution. That means it treats contact as morally and emotionally sticky. Once something feels contaminated, the feeling can outlast the actual threat. In clinical OCD, that can become torment. Washing stops being a sensible disease avoidance behavior and becomes a ritual that never fully closes. Then there is order. An order sounds trivial until you place it in the material reality of prehistory. In a modern room, if you misplace a lighter or a knife, you waste 10 minutes and curse at a drawer. In a small foraging camp or a seasonal shelter, losing the location of a blade, a sewing awl, tinder, medicine plants, binding cord, or stored dry food is not a personality quirk. It is inefficiency where inefficiency carries a tax. This is why some researchers talk not only about OCD, but about obsessive-compulsive traits as dimensional, meaning they are distributed across the population in degrees rather than existing as a sharp border between normal and abnormal. On one end, you get the person who likes tools where tools belong, who remembers sequences, who notices if the cordage was left in the damp, who gets irritated when things are out of place, because out of place means unavailable when needed. On the far end, you get distress, rigidity, paralysis. Ancient life rewarded inventories. Quietly, a well-packed kit, a remembered route, a repeated procedure for drying meat or preparing hides or storing seed or preserving embers. These are not glamorous capacities. Nobody writes myths about the person who consistently keeps boring systems working. Civilizations, camps, households, all of them depend on that person anyway. But there is the undercut again. Order is adaptive when it serves a task, and pathological when the task begins to serve the order. When arrangement starts eating time for no gain, when precision ceases to protect and starts to imprison, you have crossed into different territory. The trait may have roots in something useful. The full syndrome is another matter. Now another spoke, ritual. Not ritual in the mystical sense, at least not only that. Ritual in the plain human sense of fixed sequences, done the same way because repetition reduces error. People often hear compulsion and imagine meaninglessness, but repetition is one of the oldest technologies humans have ever had. Repeated steps encode memory. Repeated gestures steady attention. Repeated routines coordinate groups. If you process food the same way every time, if you knot the carrying sling in the same order every time, if you inspect the spear point the same way every time, if you prepare an infant's sleeping area the same way every time, you reduce variance. And reducing variance is another name for reducing risk. Even children tell you something about this. Developmental research has long noticed that normal childhood often includes rituals, routines, superstitions, insistence on sameness. Bedtime must happen in the same order. Certain objects must be arranged just so. Certain small acts seem to produce outsized calm. That does not mean all childhood ritual is early OCD. The evidence does not cleanly support that. In fact, researchers have been careful here. But it does suggest that human minds are not strangers to ritualized behavior. We arrive with some readiness for it. The more uncomfortable fact is that the same tendency that helps a child create predictability in a huge, uncertain world can, in some people, harden into something far more painful. A stabilizer can become a cage. Same architecture, different outcome. Now let's talk about food storage and saving, because this one is messy and modern people often hear it with a smirk. Hoarding in severe form can be debilitating. It can destroy living spaces and quality of life. That needs to be said clearly. But saving behavior itself is not absurd. For most of human history, abundance came in bursts and absence came on schedule. A tree fruits, then it doesn't. A hunt succeeds, then it fails. Weather turns. Animals migrate. Other groups arrive. In that world, an impulse to keep what might matter later has obvious survival logic. Twine bone points, dried strips of meat, useful stones, containers, hides, medicinal plants, scraps that can be repaired into something else later. These are not clutter if the future is unstable. The sensory example almost writes itself, a corner of shelter with carefully stacked bundles. Smoke-dried meat hung above, cordage coiled away from damp, broken tools kept because the shaft might be reused. Pebbles selected because their edge is better than the others, seeds or nuts saved against the lean interval. Waste less, keep more, delay comfort. That is the grammar of scarcity. But here, too, the twist inside the trait is obvious. A system tuned to scarcity does not know when the season has permanently changed. It does not know what enough is in a world of shelves, plastic bins, and online delivery. And even in ancient settings, saving too much had costs. Mobility slowed, decisions thickened, space shrank, priorities blurred. Useful pressure can become compulsive accumulation. Then there is social life, which is where this gets more interesting than the stereotype of the lonely sufferer locked in private ritual. Human groups survive partly by trust, and trust depends on predictability. Did you clean the wound properly? Did you follow the burial rules? Did you keep waste away from water? Did you perform the hunt preparation the accepted way? Did you violate a taboo that others believe keeps disaster away? Some anthropologists and evolutionary psychiatrists have speculated, carefully, not conclusively, that certain obsessive-compulsive tendencies may have had social value because they make people unusually sensitive to norm breaches, contamination boundaries, procedural correctness, and possible future harm. The one who insists on rules can preserve coordination. The one who insists too much can suffocate it. Picture a small group depending on cooperation in bad weather. The person who notices that the raw hide was laid too close to clean tools, that the infant's bedding was handled after butchering, that a ritual preparation was skipped before a dangerous trip, that supplies were not counted before leaving. That person may look difficult until the mistake turns costly. But a mind organized around rule precision can also become punitive, frightened, exhausting to live with. It can protect the group. It can strain the group. Both things can be true at once. That is the pattern you keep seeing. Not a superpower. Not a defect with no ancestry. A trade-off. Now here's something that almost nobody talks about when they ask big evolutionary questions about mental illness. Evolution does not select for happiness. It selects crudely for survival and reproduction under local conditions, and even that story is never neat. So if you are asking whether a trait helped ancient humans, the answer does not have to mean it felt good, worked perfectly, or produced a flourishing life. A trait can persist because it is better than the alternative in one domain while being costly in another. It can help at low levels and hurt at high levels. It can protect one member, burden the group, then reverse those effects in a different environment. And once you see that, the whole question changes shape. Because maybe the right comparison is not between OCD traits and no OCD traits. Maybe it is between a species with no built-in tendency toward precautionary repetition, contamination avoidance, future simulation, and order tracking, and a species that has all of those things but pays a price when the settings run too hot. The first species would be wonderfully relaxed, briefly. Now let's talk about uncertainty itself, because uncertainty may be the real engine here. Human beings are unusually good at mental time travel, meaning we can imagine futures that have not happened yet. Rehearse them, dread them, try to intervene in them before they become real. That capacity is adaptive in obvious ways. It lets you plan migrations, preserve resources, anticipate rivals, protect children, avoid storms, map seasonal return. But it also means you can represent threats inside the mind long after the environment has gone quiet. You can imagine the child falling into the river before the child is near the river. You can imagine the contamination spreading beyond what you can see. You can imagine the ember surviving beneath the ash even after you have looked. Some theorists have argued that OCD may involve an exaggerated or dysregulated form of that anticipatory machinery, the ability to model possible harm, refusing to switch off. And that means the ancient advantage, if there was one, may not have been obsession in the dramatic sense at all. It may have been the ordinary human burden of being able to think one step too far ahead. The person who notices the loose stone, the unusual silence, the smell of spoilage, the missing item, the sequence done out of order. That person is running simulations. Fast ones, mostly unconscious ones, usually helpful, until they become tyrannical. Now let's talk about group diversity, because evolution rarely bets on one personality template. In many species, including ours, variation itself can be useful. Some individuals are bolder. Some are more exploratory. Some are calmer under stress. Some are more vigilant, more inhibited, more repetitive, more exacting. A hunting party full of only risk seekers is a problem. A camp full of only maximal worriers is also a problem. But a mixed group can distribute functions. One person pushes outward. Another person notices what the first one forgot. One improvises. Another standardizes. One accepts uncertainty. Another refuses to leave the shelter until the lashings are checked. This does not prove that OCD genes were selected for in some simple, direct way. The evidence is nowhere near that clean. Modern genetics suggests obsessive-compulsive symptoms are polygenic, which means influenced by many variants of small effect, and dimensional, which means spread across the population rather than housed in a separate little box marked disordered people. That matters. It means what may have been preserved over evolutionary time is not a single package, but a cluster of tendencies: caution, error sensitivity, disgust reactivity, repetitive action, doubt conscientious checking. That in some combinations and intensities can be useful, and in others can become devastating. Now, and this is essential, so I'm going to slow all the way down here. There is a real danger in telling this story badly. If you say OCD kept our ancestors alive, too cleanly, too triumphantly, you end up romanticizing a disorder that can be brutal. Real OCD is not quirky fastidiousness. It can eat hours from a day, steal sleep, inflame skin, wreck relationships, imprison thought, and make people feel alien to their own minds. Many compulsions do not produce actual safety. Many obsessions are not proportionate to any realistic threat. And we do not have direct archaeological evidence showing that a recognizably OCD ancient human stood by the fire and saved the tribe through superior checking. That is story logic, not evidence. What we have instead are converging hints. We have research suggesting that some symptoms sit on a continuum with ordinary human traits. We have theories that human threat management systems, contamination avoidance systems, and future simulation systems can become dysregulated. We have evidence that disgust, vigilance, and ritualized routines can serve adaptive functions in ordinary life. We have developmental clues that ritual is not foreign to the human mind. And we have the broader evolutionary principle that defenses are often biased toward false alarms, because false alarms are cheaper than missed catastrophes. That supports a nuanced claim. It does not support mythology. There is another caveat. Ancient environments were not universally better fitted to these traits. A highly ritualized, doubt-ridden person in a fast-moving, dangerous, socially demanding setting could be at serious disadvantage. If you're checking delayed movement during a threat, if your contamination fears made food preparation impossible, If your orderliness became inflexible when improvisation was needed, those same traits could cost you dearly. Adaptive does not mean universally useful, it means conditionally useful. In some contexts, at some intensities, with some trade-offs. That is less satisfying than a clean yes. It is also more honest. So now let's return to the central question. Did OCD traits keep ancient humans alive? The honest answer the evidence allows is something like this. Traits associated with OCD probably overlap with ancient survival systems that often did keep humans alive. But that is not the same as saying OCD itself was an adaptation. The capacities underneath the disorder, precautionary checking, contamination avoidance, sensitivity to disorder, ritualized repetition, anticipation of future harm, make deep evolutionary sense. In moderate forms and in the right settings, they could absolutely have reduced risk. They could have helped with fire safety, food safety, child protection, tool management, social coordination, and preparation under uncertainty. But when those same systems become extreme, sticky, and self-reinforcing, you no longer have a survival edge. You have suffering. Same roots, different scale, different result. And maybe that answer matters because it changes the emotional frame. It suggests that some of the most painful features of the human mind are not random graffiti splashed onto an otherwise rational machine. They are exaggerations of systems that were built to protect you. Clumsy, overzealous, exhausting protections, yes. But protections. Your mind would rather alarm you 10 times for nothing than miss the one thing that could end the story. That bargain kept humans around long enough to build villages, rituals, laws, medicine, psychiatry. It also left some people carrying the cost in unbearable form. So if you widen the lens, this is not only a story about OCD. It is a story about what kind of animal you are. You are not built for serenity first. You are built for uncertainty. You are built to detect patterns in noise, dirt on hands, movement in grass, a break in routine, a thing slightly out of place. You are built to repeat what once worked, to fear contamination you cannot see, to imagine futures before they arrive, to become attached to procedures, because procedures are how fragile creatures survive in a world that does not care whether they do. Sometimes that architecture looks wise. Sometimes it looks ridiculous. Sometimes it hurts people so badly that the old adaptive story feels almost insulting. But even then, I think, it tells you something sobering about being human. The line between a safeguard and a prison is often just intensity, context, and whether the brain can still hear the signal to stop. And that stop signal may have always been the rarest thing.